Hey everybody, I wanted to do a reaction video to this video that Pat and Ian did on the CUPodcast earlier today on September 18th, Saturday, and now I'm filming this. It's like actually early Sunday morning, September 19th. I don't really do these typically, or really hardly ever. I know that Pat and Ian sometimes do videos like this for like the Television Amico, and they want to make fun of the videos or whatnot. I'm not going to make fun here, but I really want to respond to this as a established PC game collector with a very nice established collection of PC games. Just to talk about some of this. Will computer games ever be as collectible as console games? I don't know the answer to the question, but I do want to respond to some of the things that Pat and Ian say, and there's nothing against them. They're both seem to be fine people. I met them in person at different conventions, things like that. But regardless, some of the things they say in this video just don't really make sense to me, and I think they just don't have enough knowledge on the topic. Pat obviously has been collecting PC games for some time, at least, to some extent, but that's not the bulk of his collection, as is probably pretty obvious, at least as far as I know. So what I want to do here is I'm actually just gonna play the video, and I'll let them talk a little bit, and I'll pause it when I get to points that I want to respond to, and I may edit some parts out if they go for a while without anything interesting for me to say, but definitely some things I want to talk about here. So let's go and start it off.
Will computer games ever be as collectible as console games?
I don't think so. So there are people who really like their PC games and do collect them. They're out
and I'm one of those people, which, by the way,
there. But there's a couple of reasons I think PC games are going to be less collectible, or not. I don't want to say less collectible. There are definitely going to be some that are worth money. I don't think the market.
There are now, yeah.
Yes. I don't think the collectible PC game market is going to ever be as big as the collectible console game market. A couple of reasons. One, space.
Final Frontier.
One of the things that makes, I think, old PC games appealing to people to collect, especially PC games from, the 80s and 90s, is that they came in big boxes that commanded your attention. And
so I'm just going to stop here. This is true. Most people that collect PC games like the big boxes and like the artwork. I mean, I don't know, though, if it's true, though, that people that collect console games don't care about the boxes. I mean, maybe that at one point was the case, and people like collecting loose NES carts and things like that. But I think nowadays the trend is going more towards people collecting stuff in box. I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure that's the case. And the boxes are not that much smaller than PC boxes. Yes, PC boxes are bigger typically. The collector's editions can be huge sometimes, but the same thing for console games. But I don't know that space is a reason why people would not collect PC games particularly. It doesn't seem like a good reason to me.
And they had big full-color manuals usually in there. Sometimes they had a big chunky booklet of copy protection measures. Obviously,
Maps.
Games like the Zork games had feelies and little trinkets in it.
By the way, I just want to say, I don't know what representative sample of games that Pat's showing here in the back. I just wanted to say I have all those games. Not that it matters, not to establish my collecting credentials or anything like that, but I do happen to have all those games, and probably a heck of a lot more. And by the way, Ian's right about one thing. The feelies that came with PC games, like, not Zork particularly, Zork didn't really come with too much, but a lot of the Infocom titles came with really awesome feelies, and I have a Starcrust saucer up there, which is pretty awesome.
And that's all very appealing. They look good on a shelf. So collectors who have space...
They look like books on a shelf.
Yeah, they look like books. So collectors who have the space...
They don't look like books. I dispute that. They look like game boxes for the most part.
Yeah, there is some real appeal to big box PC games, but I think, compared to like a PS2 game, a 360 game, an NES cartridge, even a complete NES game, you're taking up a fraction of the space. And when you...
It is true compared to, let's say, a PS2 game or, a DVD box game. A PC game will take up more space, but that's also the same thing for any PC title that's been released, like after 2010, they came in DVD boxes or whatnot. Now, having said that, those are not the ones that people collect. It's interesting that in the console world, people are, still collecting, quote-unquote, PS2 and above. I think in the PC game market, though, the collections are much more geared towards the actual boxes. So that's where Ian is correct. But those are not the games that are, for the most part, fetching big bucks in the console world either. They're mostly the NES games, the Super NES games, things of that vintage, with some exceptions, obviously. Same thing with the PC world. There's always some exceptions.
Talk to collectors, and when you talk to them about getting rid of, when they talk about getting rid of collections, a lot of times one of the first things they bring up is, I just don't have the space anymore, or I don't want to take up the space. So space is one of them.
Space, the final frontier.
Again, agreed, but I think that's not the reason why people don't collect PC games, because of space. Because if that was the only issue, they'd find. I mean, it isn't a problem for me to find space too, but you find a way. And most people's collections are not as large as mine is, for that matter.
2, digital gaming got into the PC realm and became acceptable in the PC realm a lot earlier than it did in console gaming.
So this is true as well, but it's really misleading the way Ian says it, because digital gaming in the PC world probably became, acceptable, quote unquote, maybe, 5 years before the console world. That's true, but that's not the game. Those are not the games that people are collecting in terms of PC games. So maybe this explains a little bit why games from the PS2 era are collectible, but and PC games of that era maybe are not. But I don't think that's even really true. Anything until, let's say, the year 2000 or so is going to come in big boxes, and even after that, there's some bigger boxes, there's small boxes, things like that. So, I mean, the fact that some of the later ones are digital has no impact really on the PC game collecting scene, which focuses on much more of the earlier stuff.
Way earlier. It's still not really fully accepted.
About 10 years before.
Yeah, in console gaming. So there's just a lot of stuff that doesn't really have a collectible item or unit. On top of that, as it got more and more into the internet age, and things like serial numbers, single-use serial numbers and whatnot,
2000s, yeah,
became necessary for playing these PC games as anti-piracy measures. That's another reason why PC games are never going to be as collectible, because when you collect cartridge games, ostensibly you're able to take that game, pop it into a system, and play it.
So again, this is true, but again, it's missing the fact that the PC game collection scene does not really focus on games after the year 2000. He's going to say in a minute, you can play them, you can find a key gem, whatever. But the PC games that are actually collectible are things from the 20th century, not from the 21st century. So the fact that some of them are digital, I mean, I'd still buy PC games today that are physical copies. Yes, they're hard to find sometimes, but I can still find them for the most part even today. But I'm a minority, I think, there, because most people who collect PC games are not interested in physical stuff that are in DVD cases. They only want stuff in big boxes, and that's where actually the PC game collectors, for whatever reason, differ from the console collectors. They like those big boxes, and they care about that, and it's not just about having the disc. So some truth there, some not truth, but the stuff about the serial numbers doesn't really apply to the people that collect PC games today.
There are certain big box PC games that if you buy and that serial number is used, sure, you can go and find a key gen or a cracker and use it, but as it stands, it could be like a spent game. You get what I'm saying? There's not as much you can do with it.
Again, very, very unusual or rare for anything that's actually considered collectible in the PC game market. And the reason why, again, those later games, let's say 2010 era games, are not collectible so much is not because their key jet, their serial numbers that are used, or their Steam keys. It's just a matter of A, those games don't have the same nostalgia, they're not old enough, and B, people really don't like the DVD cases and like the bigger boxes. So the space is, I guess, an issue, like you mentioned before, but those are the things that people actually want to collect, is those larger boxes with the artwork on it.
And then lastly, I just don't think there's as big of a nostalgia market for it. No. The era of PC gaming that is probably the most collectible, the big box PC stuff, the late 80s, early 90s, even into late 90s stuff, was all when computers were still prohibitively expensive for most people, and it was not as popular of a form of gaming as, say, a Sega Genesis, a Super Nintendo, or a Nintendo. So
this is the part where I think a lot of people that see this video are going to have issues. because now I think Pat and Ian have their numbers and their dates a little bit off. Now, it's certainly true that in the late 70s, when, let's say, the TRS-80 came out, the Apple II, etc., the Commodore PET, people that were buying those computers generally were people that, are older, had some money, etc. Not always, but probably for the most part. Although Radio Shack, I think, did a lot to try to get the TRS-80 line and the Tandy line afterwards into the hands of the masses. They certainly had business-oriented computers, but they had some cheaper ones as well, and they were all over the place. But there are also computers that came out, like the Atari 8-bit series, the Commodore 64, the Texas Instruments computers, the Timex Sinclair, the TRS-80 Coco. There were a lot of computers out in the early 80s before everything became standardized, which were not that expensive, and a lot of people did buy them. True, a lot of people had console games as well, but there are a lot of people that bought their kids computers because look at Atari 2600, and let's say in 1982, okay, it came out in 77, but 1982, what's on the market for console games? There's Atari 2600, there's ColecoVision television. You can buy one of those for your kids, and you buy them a toy, or you can buy them a computer where they can play games and also learn how to program maybe and something else. And some people bought the computers for their kids and not the consoles because they could do some business stuff with them maybe. They thought they were a little more advanced. Now, it's true that in 1982, most people didn't own IBM PCs. The IBM PC only came out in 1981, and it was pretty expensive. And even when the PC Junior came out, I think in 83 or 84, it was also not cheap. And IBM-compatible computers were not a thing right away. It took time for the Compaqs to come out and the Dells to come out and all these clone computers to come out and gradually drive the price down. And that's why probably until around 86, 87 time frame, you don't see people with IBM PC computers in their houses too much. There were people that had them. I had a friend down the block that had one, and I used to go play H.R. to War in his house. But Commodore 64 was very, very prevalent. Almost all the kids in my school had one, I remember. Atari 8-bit, not so much, but also pretty popular. Commodore 64 was all over the place. So I think it's not really true that, only rich people had these computers. I think, you're looking at a very small subset of your anecdotal information, and not necessarily, go to do research on what the prices of these things were and how much they sold and things like that. I'm not going to do that right now. I'm also giving some anecdotal information, frankly, but I think your facts are a little bit off there.
Well, there are definitely people out there who do, but in terms of the amount, there's not as many people who are super nostalgic over that PC game.
That's a good point. I mean, computers didn't become affordable for the regular, middle class income till the mid 90s.
That is, I don't think that's true. Again, maybe more people had consoles than computers, and again, it's not the Atari. Think about it. When did the console thing really blow up? It was with the NES, which came out in the U.S. in 1985, but it didn't get big probably until 1987, 1988. Around then, the Genesis came out as well, 88, 89. I'm not sure exactly, something in that time frame. Those were sort of the really big console games at the time. But there were people that had computers also. And again, I didn't mention, they mentioned the Amigalators. There was the Atari ST. There was the Apple II. Tons of people had Apple IIs in their schools. Some people had them at home. The Apple II GS, that came later on. Consoles are big too. I don't think this is the reason why console gaming took off so much more than PC gaming in terms of collecting. I think it was... I'm not sure. Maybe I'll leave that for later on, but I don't think it's because so many more people had console games. It's true, maybe some more people had, but it wasn't like nobody could afford the computers, as Pat and Ian are saying in this video.
That's when it really started to come down. So you're talking the first 15 years of games on a platform or multiple platforms that most families couldn't afford.
Mm-hmm.
My father bought an XT in 85, 86. He probably spent close to $2,000 for that. In 85 money, that's several $1,000s today.
First of all, his father did buy one, he's saying, even though it cost $1,500. But again, XT was not what I'm talking about for that time period. It wasn't probably till, like I said, 87, 88 that more people had PCs, and that's again probably the same time that more people had NESs and whatnot.
Like, we're talking tons of money.
The people who are going to be most nostalgic, I feel like, for some of those PC games are going to be older than us, probably a good 10 to 20 years older than us in certain instances.
So this is where Ian and Pat have it way wrong, because I'm active in a lot of the collector groups on Facebook and others. I'm in my mid-40s. I think most of the people who are serious collectors are around that average age. There's some people I know that are older. There's some people that I know that are younger. Maybe the average actually might be in the 30s, because there's some people that in their 20s that do this and stuff like that too. But if I had to guess, I would say the average is probably around 40-ish, which is not 20 years older than Pat and Ian are. My dad is up there in age, and he had a computer back in the day, but he's not collecting games now today. So this is just wrong.
Because they were the people, young tech professionals were the people who were getting into it.
Or adults, established adults.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
I mean, there were, obviously, listen, there's exceptions to every rule. I'm sure there are some 70-year-olds who are collecting PC games, and actually, every once in a while I hear about somebody got some major haul because someone died, unfortunately, and left something behind. But it's not accurate to say that people that are active in PC game collecting are like 70 years old or anything like that in general.
So I feel like, the market for nostalgia, where you want to re-grab something for nostalgia, that lies with an older audience that may already be getting over it.
The people that played computer games in the 80s were boomers. They were our age then.
Yeah, a lot of them were.
So like
that market is gone. The people who would feel
I'm not a boomer, and not only did I play computer games in the 80s, but I remember trading computer games with people in the 80s and stuff like that, and there were people that were doing this.
Nostalgia for it are older dead.
They're retired. They're 70. Like, my father's over 70. Like, they don't care about that stuff. They don't have a huge attachment to a lot of that stuff anymore. The model train stuff is gone. So they've aged out of even the collectability. When you get to the 90s, though, it explodes to teenagers then, and some younger kids. So it's really like the 90s stuff. The 80s stuff, though, here's the thing about it. I put down a couple of thoughts here. Unlike consoles, you don't have like dedicated libraries of games.
Sure.
For like.
Okay, this is the other thing. He's going to get into this more now about how in consoles you can have, like, let's say, the full NES set, and in computer games it's a little more nebulous, which is true because a lot of Nintendo basically restricted who could publish on the NES, and for the IBM PC, nobody restricted who could publish on it. Anybody could publish on it, and nobody was the gatekeeper. So you had a lot more random games out there and things like that. A little bit more like the Atari 2600 days, although at least for the Atari 2600, people have sort of figured out what's on the platform and made a catalog. But by the way, I think that's like, I'm not like, I don't understand those collectors, honestly, who go for complete sets. It's like, let's buy a bunch of bad games just so I can say I have a complete set. I like to collect the games that I like. Most of them are good. Some of them are historically important and not so great. But in general, I like to collect things that I think are fun and good. And the fact that, this is a side point really, but the fact that I don't have a full set of whatever, that's perfectly fine with me. I don't need Madden 95, Madden 96, Madden 87. That's totally fine.
The XT versus, for the Apple II versus the Commodore versus, like, I know anyone who had an Atari computer, like an Atari ST or whatever, or even.
I had an Atari computer, by the way. So nice. You met me before, Pat. So next time we meet in person, we can talk about it.
800. A lot of those games were shared between all of them, or at least a few of them, right? There weren't that many that were exclusive to one platform. Once you get
So that's not true at all. It's true that at some point, let's say in the mid 80s, when, let's say early 80s time frame, then a company made a game, they tried to put it out for as many computers as they could. Infocom, was notorious for this because they had text adventures, so it could theoretically run on anything. They probably published their games to run on like 50 different computers. I'm exaggerating maybe, but it may not be that much of an exaggeration. They ran on lots of different things. And even graphical games, the big machines at the time, again, were the Commodore 64 and the Atari 8-bit computer, with Apple II, the aging Apple II, still sort of like, holding its own to some extent. Future coming out was at the Amiga, and then the PC around that time also was sort of gaining popularity. So if you could publish a game for a whole bunch of different platforms, you would do that. But that does not mean that different systems do not have their own exclusives. TRS-80 even earlier in the day had exclusives. Apple II had exclusives. And even if there weren't exclusives for certain games, they ran differently on different platforms. So you might want to have one version versus the other. Some collectors don't care. They don't care what version they get, but some collectors very much do care.
The Amiga, maybe some. Sure. But like, you don't have that same experience. It's hard to have a collective. It's not like there's not like an IBM XT collectors forum.
Well, that's okay. I don't know if there's an IBM XT collectors forum. IBM is sort of the exception because their systems are backwards compatible. So a game that runs on the IBM XT should theoretically still run on a Pentium, and for the most part it does. You might have to slow it down in some cases. But if you go on Facebook, there is a group that I'm part of, which is like the MS-DOS gaming group, and there's like I think 25,000 people in it. So there's definitely DOS gamers out there. And there's probably XT. I mean, there are XT gamers, there are XT collectors, but DOS is a much bigger beast than just the XT. So I think that's sort of a weird example that you're using there.
You can have a Nintendo collector forums or a Sega.
People who collect for PCs at this point, especially older ones, the ones who get really hardcore into it will have different computer setups that they can play the stuff on. But for a lot of people who are collecting this, and this does kind of go a little bit against what I said about the serial numbers, a lot of people who are collecting now are buying these things because they want them, but there's no real intention of ever playing them in the intended way. People, I mean, you've got stuff for...
Okay, that holds true for every type of collector. First of all, it's true that some types of PC collectors like to have all the hardware. I don't. I use emulators. I use the original media, and I play them on emulators. But in terms of, like you're saying, that people like to have stuff, they don't play them, that is much more true, in my opinion, for people that are console collectors that collect full sets of games. Like Pat, bless him, he does a charity marathon. You guys both do that. You do a charity marathon, you actually play some of these games that are obscure. Most people that have like a full set of whatever games on their shelf, which is not a huge amount of people, admittedly, but they have a full set, except they're missing stadium events, they're missing, Nintendo World Championships or whatever else. They're not playing like Chubby Cherub every day. Trust me, like they're not playing all these games all the time. They're sitting there for the most part. So unfortunately, that applies to a lot of people, not just PC gamers.
Out there for all different platforms.
Every platform, yeah, every platform, and it's like I'm not going to get my Apple II set up anytime soon.
There are definitely people who collect specifically for Apple II.
I would get that.
That is more specific. But there are a couple. There are definitely C64 collectors. But when you get into especially when you get into like the, I don't know. But
if I'm buying, let's say I want every King's Quest game, they don't have to be IBM versions. I can have an Apple II version. I don't care.
So Pat may not care. He's going to mention in a minute that the first King's Quest was only for PC Junior, and if you want the original release, it has the cool keyboard overlay, you have to buy the PC Junior version. In general, there are some PC game collectors that will just buy whatever and they don't care. But a lot of people do care. First of all, some people, I think most people, my experience is probably 75% of PC collectors, when there's multiple versions, they prefer the IBM release for whatever reason. Even if the IBM release is not the best one in terms of graphics, a lot of times it's not. They still prefer the IBM release because there is a thing about DOS gaming and DOS collecting out there. So that's one thing to be aware of. For Sierra games, actually, some people prefer the Apple II GS versions of some games because they have better quality sound. And sometimes I think there's even like a speech sample or two in the game. But you're right, there's some people that don't care, but a lot of people do care.
I feel like if we talk to... Okay, I see what you're saying. I feel like if we talk to some big PC game collectors, there are probably some that are a little bit more specific about that.
You can talk to me anytime if you want.
I think if I didn't grow up with a lot of those games on those shelves, so I don't care what platform I got them for.
I wonder if there's anything like the attempt to own the system of origin, basically, like own the version that came out first.
There is. Some people like to buy the version of the game that came out first. Some people like to buy the one that performs the best, that has the best graphics or whatnot, and some people don't care, and some people like the IBM version, and there's some people that will buy every version, although I think that's really very... like, those are a couple of interesting people. That's not widespread, in my opinion.
A lot of times they came out about the same time, though. That's the thing. Sure. It's like I have the first... the one thing that's definitely a first is King's Quest came out in the IBM Junior. It's in that weird hard plastic box. That came out for sure first. Then All the other stuff, I mean, it's probably off by days or weeks for some of those. You know what I mean?
So that might be the case in terms of the release date, but a lot of times it was actually developed for a particular computer. Let's say it was developed for the Atari 8-bit, and then they had either people in-house or out-of-house like convert them over to Commodore or whatnot. By the way, I'm only talking U.S. this whole time. I apologize to people like across the pond who had like their Speckies and the BBCs, and I know about that, and I apologize. I just been focusing my comments more on the U.S. side, but I think the same certainly applies across the pond and elsewhere. But yeah, I mean, a lot of times, almost every time, there's one particular version that the game was developed for, and then it was ported to other versions. So sometimes I'll purposely look for the ones that are the original coding of they're sort of the original intent of the developer.
I mean, so it's like, who cares? Like you're getting the Commodore one done the same exact time. A lot of times they're in the same box together.
That is nice when you get, let's say, Commodore and Atari in the same box. That's awesome, since you can have two versions and try them both. But it doesn't mean I don't care. It just means that I'm getting a freebie.
For some of those, sometimes you got multiple versions in the same. You know what I mean? You get in the same box. It's not all, but that happened. So there's not that pull to being like a shelf collector. To get the entire. If you're not a.
That is very true. And again, I don't understand that phenomenon. I think those people are like. Again, I'm not going to say anything, but that's not how my brain works, at least. Like, just to buy the entire something just to have it. Like, yes, I understand there's some aspect of collecting. Let's buy all the baseball cards, and let's have the full, 2020 Donruss set, if they even make Donruss cards anymore. Let's have the full 1986 score baseball card set or Fleer baseball card set. But, like, there's also people that don't do that. They just say, I want my, my Derek Jeter rookie card, and that's it. There are people that collect different things, right? In the PC world, they're not collecting full sets. I'm not trying to collect a full set, but I might try to get a full set of Sierra games, or a full set of Epix titles, or a full set of Avalon Hill, or a full set of SSI, or a full set of LucasArts, or a full set of any number of different publishers. That is feasible, and a lot of people do that.
Library collector, what happens? The popular stuff people go after, or maybe the really weird, rare stuff, all the shit in between, no one cares about it. There's not going to be a collectible market for 80% of these PC games.
Right.
You can.
So there may be some truth to that. I mean, that might be the reason why you can sometimes find a rare PC game and it's cheaper. And although I think it happens in the console world too. It just depends on what people are interested in. It's like Atari 2600 games that you can find for very cheap if they're hard to find, because people just don't care about them. But it's definitely true that there's a certain number of titles in the PC world that get a lot of respect. Probably like an undue amount. Like Doom, for example, is a great game. A lot of people have played it because it was shareware and whatnot. It goes for a lot of money. Does it deserve to go for a lot of money? Yes, it does. But in comparison to other games that were almost as good, just as good, etc., it's a little bit overrated, I would say. And then there's other games that are much more underrated. So you're right, Pat, I guess, because people are not going for a full set. There'll be more of these hidden gems. But I think that happens to a lesser extent maybe in the console, but it does happen. So I think that's a good point you're making there.
You find a lot of rare PC games, they're not worth anything. You can't find them, but if you find them, no one's buying them. Because
I'm buying them. If you don't want them, let me know. I will buy them.
There's not people that experience them, and they're not collecting sets.
And by the way, one thing that I have noticed is sometimes, like, there'll be, on eBay, there'll be an auction for some rare game that I haven't seen, like, once in 20 years, and it'll go for a lot of money. There may be only, like, 5 real serious bidders, but, as long as it's not only one, it's going to go for big money sometimes. So sometimes the rare games fly under the radar if some of the big collectors have them already, but the really rare stuff, there's probably more truly rare PC games that go for big money at the end of the day than there are truly rare console games that go for big money, because at the end of the day, there's a lot more copies of some of those console games out there.
The other thing I put down here was piracy. Obviously, piracy was rampant in the 80s and 90s for PC games. So if I played a lot of stuff pirated, I didn't. Most of my games were real ones in the 90s, or shit.
Most of my games were pirated at a certain point in time, so I'm not as holy as Pat is.
Shareware. I got more pirated stuff once I got to the late 90s. Once you got to T1 internet and college. If I pirated a lot of stuff, I don't have the nostalgia to get like the original box and game. I just wouldn't. Like,
there's some truth to that. If you just pirate a bunch of stuff and you're just collecting, a bunch of files, you're not going to have nostalgia for that. But at the same time, there's a lot of people that pirated stuff because they had no choice back then, and then they now want to track down the original version, either to have it in the box or to make good by the developer or whatever else their reasoning is. So a lot of people actually that did pirate stuff back in the day do buy stuff today. And actually, it's really interesting in terms of shareware that you mentioned, because the shareware collectible market is massive for whatever reason. There are some really good games out there, that releases shareware. Doom is an example. Jill of the Jungle is another one I like. Commander Keen is another great example. And some of those games deserve to be very expensive or worth a lot of money to find them actually in box, since a lot of them were sold digitally. But there's also a lot of crappy ones that people have a lot of nostalgia for just because it's the only game they were able to play, because that's the only thing that their parents would give them is some downloaded shareware. So even some crappy shareware game, people are like, oh my god, I have so much nostalgia for that, I want it so badly. Not always a quality thing there. It's just sometimes about nostalgia. So even that stuff will go for big money sometimes.
And I'm not saying that speaks for everyone, but I think a lot of people will be like, yeah, I played a pirated, Abrams tank game in '86. Why do I need the original? So it doesn't carry through the same way.
Yeah, I don't want Abrams tank either, by the way.
I feel like the nostalgia is with PC games. I don't know how to say this properly. This isn't exactly right, but something along the lines of the nostalgia is more embedded in the actual gameplay. There's less of if you're downloading stuff from BBSs, if you're getting shareware, if you had pirated games, you're not really thinking about the packaging, you're not associating it with something. It's the gameplay that you remember. So when you want...
I haven't seen that really hold up. I don't know if that's true. It may be true for some people. Maybe that explains some of the less, collectability, and the fact that more people are into console game collecting than computer game collecting, but there's certainly a lot of people who do collect, who used to download a lot of stuff back in the day.
Want to feel like you can cure that nostalgia bug by going online and pirating that game.
Yeah.
And playing it.
So the first piece I've been collecting, I was ahead of the curve as I've been with most of these consoles, fortunately for my wallet. I started collecting PC stuff 2012, 11. I got in pretty early. It has...
Just by the way, I probably started collecting PC games at about, I would say, 1990.
It's only blown up until the past few years. It's gotten a lot hotter. And so the first stuff I bought, Ian, was the stuff I had as a kid, or stuff that I remembered. It was like I was searching for. That was the one specific one I wanted. I wanted the IBM XT version of Commando, because that was the first computer game I ever had. So that's the one I did want the specific one of. All the ones I've gotten, though, have not been specific. I went out and got a lot of the Sierra stuff because I.
So I think when I started collecting, first of all, I had a bunch of games already before I would say I officially started collecting. I was sort of holding on to some things. For when I was younger, when I was a kid. But when I started actively collecting, some of them were games that I used to have that disappeared, or I didn't have them anymore. And some of them were games that I always wanted to have. I read them in magazines. I never got a chance to play them, and they sounded really good, or I heard they were really good. So, it may just be also some of the, how you grew up, or what you're reading, or what the culture was. I didn't have a Nintendo Power subscription. Maybe I should have. I wish I did. But I did have subscriptions to other, computing magazines, like kids magazines, like Family Computing and stuff like that. And there was always ads for games in there that I was interested in playing. And sometimes even in the comic books I was reading, there were ads for computer games as well as console games. So anyway,
I remember playing Sierra stuff. I got all the Leisure Suit Larrys, and I got the King's Quest, and I got the Space Quest, stuff like that. Those are the ones that drew me in. But then I stopped, or then I got some weird stuff. I got the first edition of SimCity they pulled from shelves because it had Godzilla on it. They weren't allowed to use it.
I have that too, and it's amazing how many copies of that exist. It's just there's tons and tons of them apparently.
So I got some weird stuff like that, but it was stuff you had to have known about. And again, it's almost like computer collecting is right now where video game collecting was in the mid '90s. We're just still figuring out stuff that exists.
See, that comment that Pat just made is probably the biggest issue I have with this whole video. Because that implies, at least I understand it correctly, that computer gaming has just not sort of gotten there yet. He says computer gaming now is where console gaming was in the mid-90s, and that sort of implies to me that as we move forward in time, computer gaming will get to where console gaming is now, which I think is probably true. It seems like it's lagging behind the console game market, but it's definitely picking up a lot of steam. I keep seeing games sell for more and more money. And by the way, I'm a very big PC game collector, but I wish the prices would stay very low because I'm into this for the money. I'm in it because I love games, so I want to buy more games. So maybe after I die, which hopefully will be extremely long time from now, maybe my kids will want to sell this stuff and they can make some money maybe. But I'm not interested in that. I'm interested in buying stuff and playing games and having a good time. So I want stuff to stay cheap. But in any case, it does seem like things are going, higher and higher and higher, and it's getting there. And back to what I was saying before, if that's the case, that negates a lot of what Pat and Ian were saying in this video before. Because earlier they were saying essentially the reason why, computer games are not so big is because people don't have so much nostalgia for them. They couldn't afford the computers. They were pirating them. They didn't care about those games, whatever. But if it's right now where console gaming was in the 90s and it's actually going to get bigger and bigger, then all that stuff about people don't care is not really true. So I must be misunderstanding something, or I think Pat and Ian just sort of contradicted themselves.
A lot of the rare stuff isn't worth any money, or even weird variants that I've shown Ian. This is the weird Blakestone variant that you can't find, but no one cares because we're not into it yet.
Sure.
So yeah, that's all I'm going to say. So will there eventually be graded computer games? Absolutely. That's going to be the final frontier. Computer games is...
I think there already are. I wish graded games would go to hell, frankly. This is a whole separate video I could make on this, but graded games are, in my opinion, ruining this hobby. People are out for making money and not out for having a good time, and any hobby like this should be about having a good time and playing the games and enjoying them, not about sealing them in a slab of plastic, which the idea is it should never be opened and no one should ever play the game ever again. Especially PC games, which are about the feelies, like Pat said before, and all the cool stuff that came in the package. Let's just seal it up so no one can ever see it, no one can ever use it. I'd rather not. Comic books tried that in the 90s with the polybag stuff. People rejected it. I wish people would reject this stuff too. Obviously now with comics you have the sealed, all the graded stuff that's sealed, but for comic books I think it's more necessary, but I still don't like it, but I really wish for gaming it would go away, but that's a whole other story, unfortunately.
It's always the final frontier for video game collecting for the reasons we talked about and probably more, and we'll get there eventually. We will. It won't be every single game, but and the other thing though is that I think that also the golden age of computer gaming, a lot of people was the mid 90s or so. So it's a lot easier to find those games. Maybe not a sealed Doom 2 commercial, but you can find those. So
again, if Pat says we're going to get there eventually, then it seems like it contradicts the rest of this video about why computer games are not collectible or not as collectible or whatever else. So anyway, I think that's enough. Are computer games less collectible than console games? First of all, they're not less collectible. Do less people collect them? I think they're more collectible, by the way, because of all the feelies and everything else. Do less people collect them right now? Yes. What's the reason? I don't know. Maybe some of the factors that people mentioned about... I think there's also a network effect, though, because what I've seen in collecting is people want stuff that other people want. If they see other people want something, either it's a particular game or a bunch of stuff, and it's oh, that's worth something? Oh, cool. So when you get to the point where console games are worth something, and people know that, more people get interested in collecting console games just because they think they're worth something. And I think for computer games, it hasn't quite completely sunk in yet that they're worth something. So we haven't gotten sort of those... at least too many of those speculators, investors into the market, and for all I'm concerned, they can stay out of the market forever. Let computer games always be less collectible than console games from that perspective. Let's have the computer game collectible market stick to the people who actually care about computer games, and I'm very, very happy if other people don't enter. But for the people that actually like games, there's awesome computer games out there that don't exist on consoles, or they're much better on the computers than they are on the consoles. And if you're just playing console games, you're missing out. You're missing out big time, man. There's great PC games out there to play and collect, and some of them are not on GOG, and some of them are not on Steam, and some of them there's great stuff. So if you like that stuff, you might already be subscribed to my channel because I stream a lot of these things. I also stream console games. I like them both. They're both great. But don't think that they're any less collectible, quote-unquote, than console games. Anyway, I just wanted to respond to this because there's some things in this video that I think were just not accurate. Let me know what you think. Leave a comment. Hit like if you like it. If you don't like it, you can say don't like it. But let me know in the comment section what you think of this. It's the first time I've ever done a video like this. Maybe I'll do some more, but let me know what you think. Anyway, thanks everybody. Sorry this was long, but it is what it is. Have a great day.